Hi there. So a few weeks ago, the Hardhat team released a new plugin called the Hardhat Ignition. Just in case you're wondering, what is Hardhat? Hardhat is a framework for building on Ethereum. It has a lot of cool features that help developers manage and automate smart contract development processes. It also comes with a built-in Hardhat network, which is basically a localhost version for Ethereum network, and is built specifically for development processes. In Hardhat, plugins are like the powerhouse of everything that happens there, and one of the latest addition to the list of plugins is the Hardhat Ignition. Hardhat Ignition is a declarative system for deploying smart contracts on Ethereum. It promises to tackle a lot of deployment issues and offers a better end-to-end deployment experience. If you're coming from a Web2 background, it's basically like CI/CD pipeline but for smart contracts. It has some cool benefits like restart on failed deployments, ability to modify existing deployments, gas fee spike management, and it also has this nice deployment visualization reporting that it does. And it is important to know that as of the time of recording this video, Hardhat Ignition is still on beta, so just something to be aware of in case you want to use it, because it might not be 100% stable. So with that being said, let's jump right into the code and see Hardhat Ignition in action. I'm going to create a new Hardhat project and build a basic token smart contract with it. And as you can see, I already opened a newly created folder called token on my terminal and my VS Code window. So let's initialize a Hardhat project. To follow along, make sure you have Node.js installed, at least version 16.0. And that's because Hardhat is built on Node.js and it needs Node.js to run. Just like every other Node.js project, we are going to initialize it with npm init. I'm going to use -y to skip all the prompts. So yeah, so now we have our package.json ready, and the next step is to install Hardhat. So I'm just going to paste this here, npm install Hardhat, and we are installing Hardhat as a dev dependency. So wait for that to install. So now that Hardhat is done installing, the next step is to initialize Hardhat. So you're gonna paste this here, npx Hardhat init. So I'm going to go with the first option here, which is just a JavaScript project. Just going to click yes for everything. Yeah. So wait for this to initialize our Hardhat project. Yeah, so our Hardhat project has been successfully initialized. So you can see what we have right here. We have the contract folder, the node modules, scripts, tests, and everything. I think the most important thing here is the Hardhat config. This is what Hardhat used to recognize that this particular folder here is a Hardhat project. So now that we have successfully initialized the Hardhat project, let's go into the smart contract that we're going to be using for this. So like I said, we are going to be building a token smart contract. I'm just going to paste the code here and work it through. It's just something simple. I'm going to replace this with this. So it's basically a token smart contract called source. It is simple, total supply of this. So basically just means transfers, and it can give us the balance of a particular user. So I'm also going to rename this to token for conventional reasons. I'm also going to do the same for the test. So I have the test suite for this as well. I'm going to replace this with this and also rename this to token. So now we have both the contract and the test all ready. Along with me, I'm going to put a GitHub link to the finished code in the description so you can check it out and come back to the video. So that aside, let's go back to the terminal and see if our code works as expected. So I'm going to clear the terminal, yeah, and let's run npx Hardhat compile to be sure that our contract compiles properly. It says, oh, I just compiled it some minutes ago off the camera, so that's why it says nothing to compile. So next is npx Hardhat test. So our code compiles and it passes all necessary tests. So the next step is to deploy the smart contract. I mean, we've done everything, which is the main reason why we are here. And to do that, we are going to be using the Hardhat Ignition. Because the Hardhat Ignition is a plugin, it doesn't come with the Hardhat library. We are going to install Hardhat Ignition as a dev dependency as well. So I'm going to paste this here. And wait for this to install. Alright, so we successfully installed Hardhat Ignition. The next step is to come to the config file and activate or enable the plugin. So in Hardhat, to enable plugins, you just add them, just import them to this file here, and you're good to go. So now that we have initialized the Hardhat Ignition plugin, the next step is to create an ignition module. In Hardhat Ignition, deployments are made up of ignition modules. Ignition modules let you outline and describe your system just the way you want to deploy it. By convention, you have to put them in the ignition folder. So inside the ignition folder, I'm going to create another folder inside it called modules. Ignition modules. For this particular project, you're going to be creating an ignition module file, and Hardhat advises that you create a different file for each deployment. So I'm going to create a new file called token.js. So now that we have the deployment module file, the next step is to create the actual ignition module. To create modules, you have to call the build module function, which accepts a module ID and a callback. So let me show you what that is. So as you can see, we imported the build module function from this package here, which is the Hardhat Ignition module, and you can see the first parameter here is the ID, which in this case is deploy, and the second parameter here is the callback, which takes the parameter called M. This M here is an instance of the module builder, and it's basically an object, and it's an object with methods that's going to help you to define and configure your smart contract instances. We're going to be looking at some of those methods right here. So high level overview, what this does is basically, what this does is it deploys the smart contract and then it calls the main method on it. For the first one, we are going to be calling this module builder here. For the first one, we're going to be calling the contract method on the module builder here. And mind you, whenever you call any of these methods, either the call, the contract, or any of them, is going to return a feature. It's going to return what Hardhat calls feature. So feature is an object that represents the results of an execution step, and Hardhat needs to run that feature to be able to deploy a smart contract or interact with an existing one. And this happens completely off-chain, so it doesn't interact, it doesn't affect anything on the network. So it's going to create a contract instance and assign it to this token variable here, and I can use this token variable to core methods on that smart contract. So right here I'm calling the main method on this same smart contract instance, and I'm returning the token future. So with that being said, let's go straight to the terminal and deploy our code. So I'm going to clear the terminal again. To deploy it, we are going to run Hardhat npx Hardhat Ignition deploy, and then the path to the module file. If I run this, as you can see, it runs the deployment in batches. So it first deploys the token and then it executes the mint. So when you look up here, you're going to see that it's telling us that we are running the Hardhat Ignition in an in-process instance of Hardhat network. So basically what this means is that whatever happens here ends immediately this whole deployment is over. So it doesn't save the state on the network. It just takes a temporal network, runs this code, and then shuts down the network. So for us to persist this data, we have to run a local node, which is the Hardhat network that I talked about in the beginning. So to do that, that's why we have the second terminal right here. So we're going to run npx Hardhat node to start the local node. So now the local node is running. We have 20 accounts for test, and now we have the local node running. Let's run deployment again, but this time we're going to be running it on this node instead of the temporal chain that's the initial one gave us. So the difference between this and that and the previous script is that this time around we are specifying that we want it to be a local host network, which is this node that we're running right here. So if you run this again, we don't get this warning. We don't get this warning again. So it just tells us that it's been installed and it's been deployed. Sorry, and you can see that you can see the logs from here that it's been actually deployed to this blockchain. If you go back to our VS Code and open the Ignition folder, we are going to see a new folder called deployments, and you're going to see some folders and files here. So this contains all the details about our deployment, and Hardhat Ignition uses all this data to be able to recover from errors or resume a modified deployment, and do a lot of cool stuff. You can even take things a bit further and try to see how Hardhat Ignition handles failure. So we can come back here and try to run this again. So let's see. Oh, it says nothing to deploy because we have not changed anything here yet. So right here I'm going to add a new feature. So what this does is basically going to transfer some values to this 0 address right here. So I think that's enough to make a change. When we go back here again and we try to run this deployment, I'm going to cut these deployments halfway and see if it restarts it again when I rerun the deployment. So let's deploy this, and then once it starts, I'm going to cut. Oh, that was so fast. I wasn't able to stop it on time, but then you can see it resumed from the previous deployment, and it now added this token transfer right here. So that means it works, like it's okay. And if you notice, it's still deployed to the same address that we had initially. So yeah, so that's it for this video. I hope you found this helpful. See you in the next one. Goodbye.